When Margaret finds out that she is pregnant with twins, she is absolutely overjoyed. And she is even happier when they are born in seemingly good health. But when Margaret's doctor walks into the room after the delivery with less than good news, she feels all the joy melt away. This can't be true. Margaret, I'm so sorry, but I made a big mistake. After all the stress, all the pain, and all the worries, Margaret's twin boys are finally born. To every fiber in her body feels the ultimate relief. She can barely believe that it has all worked out in the end. But then her doctor steps into the room. His whole face has gone red, and he can barely look Margaret or her husband Timothy in the eye. They have never seen him like this before. What is going on? When he finally starts to talk, all he can do is stutter. I am so sorry. Margaret's eyes go wide and fill up with tears when her doctor speaks those dreadful words. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and click the notification bell for more amazing stories. I have made a big mistake. Both Timothy and Margaret had undergone all kinds of tests to see if science could tell them what was wrong. After so many attempts, the only plausible explanation suggested that there was something wrong with them. Luckily, this was not the case. The doctor was waiting for them to deliver some good news on the next checkup. The doctor greeted the couple and said, "Margaret, you're not having a child. You're having twins." She and Timothy just couldn't believe it. They had never given up hope, of course, but they were prepared to receive the same old bad news. "Tim, tell me this is not a dream," said Margaret. As they approached the hospital, they realized the long queue to enter the parking lot. Timothy decided to leave Margaret by the entrance while he managed to find a spot. He was just in time to catch his wife on her way to the doctor's. It was a bad time. The small hospital was swamped, and their doctor had to see Margaret at his lunch break due to his busy schedule. The doctor excused himself and left in a hurry. He was determined to get something to eat in the last 10 minutes he still had for lunch. Margaret and Timothy were left feeling worried. The doctor's rush made them feel uneasy, as they thought he wasn't even paying attention to Margaret when she was describing her symptoms. Knowing there was not much they could do, they decided to go home and trust the doctor. Timothy went to get the car, while Margaret waited for him just a few steps away from the door she had entered before. He had parked the car on a nearby street, so he would be back soon. There was no reason at all to doubt the doctor's words. He knew the doctor was an eminence as an obstetrician. He was particularly busy that day, because women from neighboring cities always come to see him. Timothy stopped the car, and Margaret got in. On their way back home, he tried to calm her down using all the arguments he had just thought of while getting the car. Margaret decided that she would not go to the hospital this time. She would try to reach her doctor on the phone. She did not have to wait for that much. When the doctor picked up and heard the same woman's symptoms, he tried to calm her down. He insisted on stress being the cause of all her pains. But the day Margaret was expected to give birth, in fact, she would not go into labor for a while. The doctor again blamed it on the stress and said it may extend the length of a pregnancy. Back at home, the couple did what any other couple would: search for information. They found plenty of websites. The doctor was then a bit more worried. With no hesitation, he contacted Margaret to check up on her. The pain hadn't returned, so that was a good sign. What was not a good sign was the fact that she hadn't gone into labor, so the doctor gave her some tips on how to induce labor naturally. One of the natural ways to induce labor the doctor mentioned was to make love. But with all the worries Margaret was having, making love was the last thing she wanted to do. Timothy was very supportive and wanted the best for his wife and their twins. They had tried everything but having sex. But when Timothy finally convinced her, it would turn out to make all the difference. However, the tranquility would not last longer as a shooting pain began right in her stomach. Apparently, it had worked. She was going into labor. On their way to the hospital, Timothy called the doctor and told him Margaret had gone into labor a few minutes before. When they arrived, the labor and delivery rooms were waiting for her. After being in the room for less than 10 minutes, one of the babies started crowing. They had to do this now, and a doctor was called to come help. Timothy and Margaret had not been in the hospital room for more than 10 minutes when it happened. It was a kind of crowing that filled the room, coming from one of the babies. The couple looked each other in the eyes. They both knew that this had to happen now. Luckily, one of the nurses seemed determined, and a doctor was called upon to come and help. The doctor came with a fast stride from around the corner, surprising Timothy by first sight. The two of them realized in that moment that they had been in contact before, the moment when this doctor had so rudely brushed Margaret's concerns aside a few months ago. Was this a coincidence? How was this doctor still allowed to help them in this critical phase? Even though Timothy had noticed this in an instant, Margaret herself was in too much pain to even look up to greet the doctor, let alone recognize the man. Timothy noticed this. On the one hand, he had half a mind to try and refuse this doctor's help. Timothy naturally kept a close eye on the doctor in the steps that followed. When everything was set up quickly and professionally, the doctor seemed to be fully engaged in the process. This calmed Timothy down significantly. Things went a little smoother from here. Within half an hour after the doctor had arrived, the first baby was already born. Timothy held the newborn. He could barely believe that he was looking at his own child. They quickly cut the umbilical cord, and after he gave the baby to a nurse standing next to him. However, the work here was not yet done. Margaret really was exhausted at this point, but she kept her energy running with the thought that she did not want to have a C-section. This kept her going through the end, and finally, the second baby started crowing. A feeling of relief came over her. The fact that this child came to the world head first as well made for a bit of relaxation in the hospital room. There was the second child that the couple had put on this earth at last. They were born, and Margaret had accomplished the mission. She could now finally surrender to her exhaustion. They held the second baby for a brief moment, before it was quickly taken by the nurse as well to do a couple of standard tests. Now, it was Timothy that had an additional request. Timothy asked the nurses to go with them during the tests to make sure that everything was all right with both of the babies. The doctor could brush the additional test to the side as an unnecessary cost or something like that. Timothy told this to the nurses, explaining the previous experience he had with this doctor. While the nurses went on to do their test, Timothy quickly returned to his wife to comfort her. What a relief this must be for Margaret. She had been through so much over the past 9.5 months, and now the most difficult part was finally behind her. Or so they thought for a moment. Margaret looked Timothy in the eyes, exhausted as she was. She made clear to her husband that all she wanted now was to hold her precious babies in her arms. Timothy knew that it could take some time before that was going to happen. He explained to her that he had requested extra tests in order to make sure that both the babies were in good health. Margaret was somewhat contented, but Margaret could not fully be at ease. She could really understand why her husband would demand this, and rationally she could acknowledge that this was indeed a clever move. Time slowly passed, minute by minute, until only after more than 2 hours, someone knocked on the door. The couple was waiting there together on the bed so tensely that neither of them had moved during the waiting period, not even for a bathroom break. Timothy confirmed that they were still there and that the nurse could come in. The restless husband and wife surely expected a couple of nurses to walk in, bringing the babies with them and handing them over. Instead, when the room finally opened, This turned out to be a false prediction. In fact, Timothy and Margaret were confronted by a sight that they did not expect at all. It was not actually a nurse that got in, but a man in a doctor's uniform. The doctor that appeared that had helped Margaret before with the delivery as well as before. The doctor that they knew very well, but also the doctor that they did not fully trust. He was here now with an unrested expression. Timothy and Margaret knew instantly that something was wrong. He could barely look the couple in the eyes. The doctor seemed stern and confident enough in the times that they had interacted before, but now it was like he was another person. He walked slowly, acted hesitant, and held his hands together in front of his chest, shoulders forward. The two in bed had never seen this behavior from him before. But before Timothy or Margaret could say anything or ask what was going on, the doctor started stuttering, saying, I'm so sorry. No more than these words were needed to make the husband and wife feel their whole world collapsing. The doctor took a long pause before he continued again. Timothy immediately felt as if something was terribly wrong with the babies. How could it be? The extra tests were just requested to be extra sure. It turned out that Timothy was only partly right. The checkup resulted in the conclusion that the twins had caught a bacteria during Margaret's pregnancy. The doctor announced this with a terribly serious tone. If Timothy would not have had this voice in his head telling him that an extra checkup was necessary, they could have been out of this room by now. If they would have been let go, the situation would have been very problematic. Fortunately, as the nurses had discovered it now, the bacteria could be rather easily treated, and the babies should not experience damage for the rest of their lives. They came to the conclusion that most likely the bacteria was caught in relation to Margaret's stomach cramps. The doctor was very aware of the fact that he had to a great extent ignored these complaints all these months ago. He truly felt terrible about this. Making such a mistake was unforgivable, so he thought, one might expect that Timothy and Margaret would have a problem forgiving the doctor. Instead, they were just over the moon that their baby twins were healthy and unharmed. As they had waited in extreme tension for so long, now finally the weight of the world fell off their shoulders. A weight also fell off the doctor's shoulders, and he promised himself that his attitude would very much change from now on. The moment finally came that Timothy and Margaret walked out of the hospital's front doors the following week. They were tired, but most of all very happy. In the weeks that came after, it turned out that no further health issues followed from the bacteria. The family was very much looking forward to spend the rest of their lives together. Binding bonds through beautiful tales. Thank you for watching.